On September 26, 2024, the world bid farewell to an icon after they had captivated audiences for almost 60 years and left an everlasting mark on stage and cinema. There was more to Kristoffer Kristofferson than meets the eye. His influence went beyond his own generation. He was a legend. Songs that seemed crafted with the spirit in mind were attributed to him by some. According to many around him, he was the one who embodied each persona with authenticity and determination. His generosity of spirit matched his immense brilliance, and he was a genuine friend to everyone fortunate enough to have known him. No matter how you felt about Kris Kristofferson, you couldn't deny that he was a legend. To be sure, Kris had his share of behind-the-scenes secrets, as do many legendary figures. And just before he went away, Kris shocked everyone with some very private, tragic aspects about his life. We need to turn back the clock and revisit the high points of Kris's remarkable journey if we are to fully understand the gravity of his last revelations. While growing up, Kristoffer Kristofferson wasn't like other kids from Texas. With a birth date of June 22, Brownsville was. Coming from a rigorous military family, he moved around a lot as the eldest of 3 siblings in 1936. However, by the time he was a junior in high school, his family had finally established in San Mateo, California. Kris began displaying the creative brilliance that would characterize his career by the time he graduated from high school in 1954. While a student at Pomona College in California, he fell in love with poetry and the works of William Blake. Instead of dabbling, Kris really nailed it. His writing was recognized with multiple honors, one of which was the top prize in an Atlantic Monthly short story contest. Still, he wasn't merely an avid reader. He proved he was as tough as he was talented by competing in Golden Gloves boxing and becoming a football superstar. Kris received a Rhodes Scholarship to attend Oxford University for literary studies following his 1958 honors graduation. Consequently, he departed for England, where he pursued both academics and songs. He recorded a couple of songs for a little label while performing in local clubs under the alias Kris Carson, but the efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Uncertain of his future plans, he returned to the United States after completing his degree. Kris took a sudden U-turn when confronted with a major choice. He decided to follow in his family's footsteps and join the U.S. Army instead of pursuing a career in academia. He was eventually stationed in West Germany after completing his training as a helicopter pilot and ranger. Still, music accompanied him wherever he went. In order to keep his artistic soul alive while serving his nation, he even formed a band with other soldiers and performed at various events. Kristofferson had risen to the rank of captain by 1965 when he received the offer that most people's dreams would have been made a place as an English instructor at West Point. His life appeared to be heading in a certain direction that summer, but a single journey to Nashville altered his trajectory. The electric vibe of the city got to him, and he began to reevaluate his interest in remaining in the military. Kris took a risk by declining the West Point gig, quitting the military, and embarking on an uncertain path to become a country music songwriter. This wasn't your average job switch. This was a giant leap into the dark, and his loved ones bore the brunt of the price. Feeling that Kris had sacrificed a distinguished career for an ideal, his parents, particularly his mother, were appalled by his choice. Kris avoided his mother for more than 2 decades due to the severe strain. At this point in time, Kris was experiencing the full force of his decisions. He was working odd jobs to make ends meet as he tried to establish himself as a musician. Even more stressful than the already difficult circumstance was the fact that his son's esophageal abnormality had left him with growing medical costs. He and his wife filed for a divorce in 1968 as a result of the strain on his personal life. Sweeping floors at Nashville's Columbia recording studios was one of his duties at the time. Kris met June Carter in this unglamorous role, which at the time appeared like a dead-end gig. He took advantage of the situation by asking her to forward a tape of his music to Johnny Cash. Awaiting her turn, Cash famously tossed it into another stack of recordings, leaving Kris to wait. Over in South Louisiana, Kristofferson was employed by Petroleum Helicopters International as a commercial helicopter pilot in order to maintain his financial stability. He returned to Nashville to pitch his songs after 3 years of hopping from sitting on oil platforms to flying helicopters. This period was creatively productive despite the grind. Those lengthy, lonely hours on the oil rigs are where he wrote some of his greatest singles, such Bobby McGee, Help Me Make It Through the Night, and others. But now Kris was doing everything to get into the music business. He was becoming desperate. They say that when everything else fails, extreme measures must be taken. He chose to physically take things into his own hands a few weeks after delivering June Carter the tapes. Kris performed an insane stunt that would go down in music history when he piloted a helicopter and touched down on Johnny Cash's front yard. That was sure to pique Cash's interest. Sunday Morning Coming Down was Cash's hit song that made him decide to record. Tune of the Year was given to Kristofferson by the Country Music Association in 1970 for the popular tune. He needed this major break. His tracks were already gaining popularity before that. In 1966, Dave Dudley's single Vietnam Blues was released. Even though Killing Time, his 1967 Golden Idol album, failed to chart, other musicians started to take note. Roy Drusky, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Roger Miller were among the country music greats who began performing his songs towards the decade's close. Me and Bobby McGee, From the Bottle to the Bottom, and Kristofferson's other songs were starting to establish him as a storyteller with a very honest style. He was already a superstar before Janis Joplin's version of Me and Bobby McGee launched him to stardom. After Joplin's death, her 1971 posthumous rendition of the song soared to the top of the charts and remained there for weeks. All of a sudden, Kristofferson's songwriting was in high demand. Even country music legend Kenny Rogers was recording his lyrics alongside Joe Simon and Ray Price. Suddenly, Kris went from being a dreamer working as an oil rig pilot to being one of the industry's most in-demand songwriters, and that was just the start. Kris Kristofferson had ridden a wave of success by the early 1970s. The plot had its ups and downs, though, as any good story does. Not content to be known merely as a lyricist, his 1971 sophomore album, The Silver-Tongued Devil and I, solidified his status as a fully fledged recording artist. Love and Her Was Easier were able to captivate audiences with their heartfelt lyrics. And the film industry wasted no time in contacting. The last film, directed by Dennis Hopper himself, was Kris's acting debut. At the Isle of Wight Festival, he even put on a performance. Mingling with the most famous rock stars of the era, his career was starting to break out of the country music niche. Kris Kristofferson rose from relative obscurity to country music stardom by the year's end 1971. His music was ubiquitous. In fact, 3 of his tracks were nominated for numerous Grammys. Kris had obviously arrived. When his song Help Me Make It Through the Night won the Grammy for Best Country Song at the awards show in March 1972, he was thrown into prominence. It wasn't long before Kris's 1972 album Jesus is a Capricorn reached #1 on the country charts, thanks in large part to his breakthrough hit Why Maine. Kris wasn't a one-hit wonder. He was clearly here to stay, as the album sold 500,000 copies and topped the country charts by November 1973. As Kris's professional life was reaching new heights, his personal life was also experiencing a period of transition. Rita Coolidge, a fellow singer, became his second wife after he filed for a divorce from his first. They were romantically involved and also had a successful musical collaboration, which their fans adored. Full Moon, their 1973 debut duet album, entered the country music charts at the top spot. Plus, their singles Lover Please and From the Bottle to the Bottom were both nominated for Grammys. On and off the road, they were the quintessential country music power couple for a spell. Spooky Lady's Sideshow, Surreal Thing, Who's to Bless and Who's to Blame, and Kris's solo albums from this era were passable, but they couldn't match the enormous popularity of the soundtrack to A Star Is Born, which he co-wrote with Barbra Streisand. With over 4 million copies sold, the soundtrack reached platinum status by 1977 and topped the Billboard 200. As Kris's star continued to rise, the song became a crossover smash as well as a country success. Kris continued to put out albums throughout the 70s, including Shake Hands with the Devil, Easter Island, and Natural Act, his last duet record with Coolidge before the two of them broke up. His music continued to touch listeners even after his marriage to Rita had ended. Legends in the country music industry such as Willie Nelson persisted in covering his tunes, and they have even worked together on projects. Kris Kristofferson had a whirlwind of success and failure throughout the 80s and 90s. Even though he kept putting out solo albums like To the Bone 1981, Third World Warrior 1990, and A Moment of Forever 1995, his work on soundtracks and in collaborations was much more prominent at this period. The Winning Hand, Kris's 1983 album, including legendary artists like Brenda Lee, Willie Nelson, and Dolly Parton, stands out among his other notable works. Reminding everyone that Kris still possessed that star power, the album reached number 4 on Billboard's Top Country Albums chart. Kris made a triumphant return to the film industry in 1984 with his role as the lead singer and composer of the score for Songwriter, for which he was nominated for Best Music at the Academy Awards. An enormous props to his musical abilities outside of country music for this. Among Kris's most memorable years was 1985. In addition to being inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, he joined the Highwaymen, a country supergroup that also included Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, and Willie Nelson. Highwaymen, their first album, was an enormous success, topping the country charts and yielding numerous memorable singles, including the title track, which was nominated for a Grammy. Over 1 million copies of the album were sold in the end. In 1990, the band released Highwaymen 2, which was nominated for another Grammy. Despite this, 1995's The Road Goes On Forever, their final album as a duo, was not quite as successful. In spite of everything that happened, Kris's musical legacy kept expanding over the years, thanks in large part to his illustrious collaborations and the esteem he garnered as a composer. Kris was a Hollywood heartthrob for reasons other than his singing. Kris Kristofferson had big dreams beyond penning legendary songs. He also wanted to be a Hollywood star. He made the leap into acting in Dennis Hopper's The Last Movie in the early 1970s, just as his music was becoming really popular. After that, he appeared in a series of films alongside A-listers. His film credits include Cisco Pike, in which he co-starred with Gene Hackman, Billy the Kid, as well as Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Ellen Burstyn. It was Kristofferson's breakout performance in A Star Is Born, nonetheless, that truly cemented his place in Hollywood's elite. Kristofferson embodied the role's raw fire as an aging rocker co-starring with Barbra Streisand. However, reviewers weren't exactly gushing about it. The film was a financial success despite mixed reviews from critics. With Kristofferson and Streisand on it, the soundtrack was also a huge hit. Kristofferson was already well known as a music superstar, but he became a Hollywood sensation thanks to this film, which brought him a Golden Globe for Best Actor. Things did settle down a bit after that high, though. Even with his big screen efforts such as Heaven's Gate and No Place to Hide, Kristofferson was involved in a string of unremarkable TV movies that he appeared in during the 1980s and 1990s. However, in the limited series America, which envisioned a future in which the Soviet Union had conquered America, he did play a politically charged character. Kristofferson made a triumphant return in Lone Star, reviving his acting career at the last possible moment. In this highly praised picture, he showed that he still possessed considerable acting talent as the multifaceted Sheriff Charlie Wade. His acting career took off from there, landing him parts in Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes and Mel Gibson's Payback, as well as the Blade Vampire trilogy and the touching A Soldier's Daughter Never Cries. He continued to work right up until the end of his career, popping up in independent features like The Western Traded and The Motel Life. Kristofferson proved that hard work and talent can take you far in the entertainment industry, whether it was through his music or films. But he had an addiction problem that nearly killed him, like many other celebrities have. Kris Kristofferson's life and career were almost ruined by his severe alcoholism. During the 60s and 70s, he admitted to himself that he was a functioning alcoholic, depending primarily on Jack Daniel's tequila and whatever else happens to be nearby. Kristofferson relied heavily on alcohol, which was more than just a lifestyle choice. Because of his severe drinking problem, he couldn't imagine performing without alcohol. During that time, it became intrinsic to his daily life and who he was. Kristofferson told people that he wasn't planning on living past the age of 30. He overindulged to the point that his liver grew to resemble a football, a telltale indicator that his body was enduring the toll of his addiction. The struggle was far from ended, even if he did manage to abstain from alcohol for a while. Relapsing into old habits in his later years, he said that he never let his trailer be empty of half a gallon of Jose Corvo. He was a successful songwriter and actor, but his drinking almost destroyed him. Addiction was a major problem for him, as it was for many others who became famous. The singer-songwriter did, however, struggle with alcohol throughout his life. You see, Kris Kristofferson frequently discussed how, despite his immense success in the music and acting industries, he still felt like an imposter. Despite his rising stardom, he openly expressed his dissatisfaction with the entertainment industry. His unorthodox rise to fame was a major contributor to his imposter problem. Before he became a musician, Kristofferson was a Rhodes Scholar and an Army helicopter pilot, thus he was never quite fit in. According to interviews Kristofferson gave, he struggled with self-doubt throughout his life and frequently questioned his own value and abilities. Despite penning some of country music's most memorable songs and garnering countless honors, he battled the self-doubt that came with his fame. His followers loved his honesty and modesty, which he shone by being transparent about his vulnerabilities. The life of a legendary performer, alas, does not endure indefinitely, passing away at the age of 88 on September 28, 2024. Kristofferson had been forthright about his health struggles in the years preceding up to his death, but his family chose not to reveal the specific cause of death. Lyme disease was eventually determined to be the cause of his memory loss, which was previously thought to be dementia or Alzheimer's. Kristofferson maintained a strong bond with his family despite all of these challenges. And he remained a cherished presence in the cinematic and musical worlds. Ashley, Chris Jr., Casey, Jesse, Jody, John, Kelly, and Blake are among his 8 children that survive him, as well as his wife Lisa Myers. In addition, he is survived by 7 grandkids. The time they spent with him and the love his followers have shown him throughout the years were both acknowledged by his family, who were grateful.